all the attendees.
Okay, there we go. And we're on. Joe, go ahead.
Welcome, everybody. January 12th, 2023. Happy New Year to the Pacific Coast Archaeological Society General Membership Meeting. And I'm going to start out by asking if there are any announcements from the group. Megan, you have something.
Okay, let me unmute. Just the scholarships will be announced very soon now. There will be $1,000 scholarships, just like last year. And all of the information is on our website, but I will also be sending out announcements, and it will be in the newsletter. And for members, if you've not yet renewed your membership, I'm still waiting for it. Otherwise, that's it.
All right. Does anybody else have any? Thank you, Megan. Anybody else have any announcement?
One quick announcement, everybody that's not the speaker, if you could go on mute, that would help. Thank you very much.
And one last thing, I want to remind everybody that we did work with the Irvine Ranch Water District to renew our ability to meet at the community meeting room, which is open right now with our speaker in it. And in December, we'll be meeting at the Duck Club. So we're covered for the 2023 calendar year. Normal second Thursday of the month dates. Okay, tonight we have the pleasure, distinction of having Joyce Stanfield Perry. She's going to make a presentation titled Where We Bow Our Heads. And Joyce Stanfield Perry is of Acjachemen, Luiseño, and Kumeyaay descent. Her work in her community spans over 30 years. She is an Acjachemen tribal scholar, founder, and president of Payomkawichum Kaamalam, founder and executive director of the Acjachemen Tongva Land Conservancy, the cultural resource director for the Luiseño Band of Mission Indians, Acjachemen Nation, and former board member of the Blas Aguilar Adobe Museum / Acjachemen Cultural Center. As an American Indian consultant for archaeological projects, Ms. Perry has negotiated with landowners for repatriation and reburial of ancestors and their belongings. She has been instrumental in developing, educating, and forming policies for cultural and historical preservation. She was a member of the Laguna Canyon Foundation Interpretive Exhibit Design Team for the James and Rosemary Nix Nature Center, member of the pseudonym Tutu Park Project, Portola Springs Community Center Acjachemen Room Project, and has been active in the Acjachemen language revitalization movement. I have the distinct pleasure of introducing Joyce Stanfield Perry. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Miyuyam Ataham. I wanted to thank the Pacific Coast Archaeological Society for inviting me to speak about my experiences at Bolsa Chica. And so before we begin, I wanted to acknowledge the changes that Pacific Coast Archaeological Society has made regarding their policies towards Native American involvement in their organization. It was as recently as the 1990s when Native Americans were not allowed to participate as members, much less speak at events such as this. Since the 90s, our tribe and the Pacific Coast Archaeological Society has built a very respectful relationship, and I'm proud to say that I have participated in making that a reality. So tonight, I will be sharing with you some of my excerpts from my journals and my thought processes over the years and what I've learned as I've observed the land being altered at the expense of our sacred sites. I hope, next slide, please, yeah. I hope that, just a second here, we got a little technical difficulty trying to make the slides move. There you go. I hope that by the end of this presentation, you will have a sense of my perspective as well as how the demands of growth and progress continue to be at odds with our traditional ways. Next slide, please. I would like to take the opportunity to formally introduce who I am and how I serve my community. My name is Juanita Joyce Stanfield Perry. I am the daughter of Mary Louise Stanfield and Roland Elvin Sellers. I am the mother of Scott and Todd, grandmother to Sophia and Landon, wife to Ron, and sister to Jesse and Martin. I serve my community as an educator and cultural resource director for the Juaneño Band of Mission Indians, Acjachemen Nation, under the leadership of Matthias Belardes. Additionally, I am the founder and president of Payomkawichum Kaamalam, an American Indian-led 501c3 nonprofit organization, as well as the founder and executive director of the Acjachemen Tongva Land Conservancy. Next slide. So I'm assuming many of you know who the Acjachemen are, but I'm just going to have to tell you briefly. We are the indigenous peoples in our traditional Orange County, and our homeland stretches from coastal Long Beach to the north, Camp Pendleton to the south, and includes all of Orange County as well as parts of Western Riverside County. We are recognized by the state of California and the County of Orange. Next. Yeah, just bear with us, please. There you go. Oh, I always enjoy seeing my dear friend. David, when a person from one tribe travels or speaks to communities, he or she introduces herself by acknowledging their traditional teachers and their family lineage. This clearly classifies the person, in many ways determines how he or she will be received. One of the first things you learn in our community is to acknowledge your traditional teachers. For about 25 years, I worked with Chief Dave Belardes, and in December of 2014, he passed on. I'd like to pay homage to his vision, his perseverance, his determination, his mental toughness. And many of you that know David, he was badass. And I hope that he knows that his spirit lives on. My talk tonight is about Bolsa Chica, which is located, there we go, which is located in the northern portion of our ancestral homeland and what is today known as the city of Huntington Beach. This is a shared territory with the Tongva Nation. The upper mesa, directly inland from Bolsa Chica Ecological Reserve and overlooking the Pacific Ocean, is the location of an ancient village site and an active spiritual and ceremonial place for the Acjachemen and Tongva peoples. I like to call it a place of knowledge and healing. It is a traditional cultural property consisting of several different ancestral sites, and collectively, these sites provided a 9,500-year sequence of habitation by our ancestors. Next, please. This space served as a major conduit between the Southern Channel Islands and the river people and villages inland. This ancient village is one of the oldest sites in the state of California, and we like to call it the oldest neighborhood in Orange County. Next, please. Here, hundreds of cogstones were unearthed, along with tens of thousands of beads and hundreds of discoidals and hundreds of ancestors. It is one of only 2 cogstones manufacturing sites in the world, and we can only guess the meaning of these items, but it's clearly significant and revered. They are clearly significant and revered. Theories are wide-ranging. Some say these stones were used as medicine or spiritual purposes, used in burial ceremonies, or were artistic representations of the sun or the stars. Others say they were used as weight fishing nets for ceremonial stone club heads or even jewelry. I can't imagine wearing something that heavy though. Okay, practice, yes. I choose to listen to the elders of our tribe when it comes to the theories of what cogstones were used for. I think it was Jose Albanez who told ethnographer J.P. Harrington that cogstones were given upon marriage. I suspect this might be part of a woman's dowry or a kinship symbol. Next, please. The mysterious cogstones have spurred archaeological interest for as early as the 1920s. Digging and outright plumaging the site under the auspice of studies have continued. The discovery of oil in the 1920s brought development and extraction to the natural life sources in the area. And with World War II, the site became part of the Bolsa Chica military reserve. Later, extensive development and expensive of both the lowlands and the upper mesa was proposed. This proposal included 1,300 homes along with a marina. After persistent grassroots protests and multiple negotiations to protect the wetlands, the State Lands Commission bought 880 acres of lowlands from the landowner in 1997. The Coastal Commission then approved the project, but only for 73 acres of the upper mesa. In 2001, Hearthside Homes sued the Coastal Commission for this development restriction. Ultimately, they resigned to building 387 homes on the upper mesa. It was the construction of these 380 homes that brought me to this place to study. It was with the guidance of Chief Dave Belardes and tribal scholar Frank Lobo that I was assigned to work as an ethnographer and a researcher. Next, please. At first, I had no concept of what was ahead of me. I understood that there was a threat of development and that gathering as much information about this place was possible and also essential, but very daunting. I learned about post-contact history at Bolsa Chica, but had no idea how this place would affect me. I traveled the country, compiling resources, collecting and creating an archive of academic sources written about the Acjachemen, Tongva, and other Southern California tribes. The intent of gathering all this data was to help us understand and interpret this extraordinarily important place and objects and stories that the Mesa would eventually unveil to us. With the financial support of the landowner, Signal Landmark, and the guidance of the archaeological firm Scientific Resource Surveys, I was able to provide a detailed bibliography of archaeological and ethnographic evidence. I conducted interviews with the Acjachemen, Tongva, and Luiseño elders, and it was through this lens that my education at Bolsa Chica started. I love that picture of me and Nancy right there. It says it all. In the beginning of the 1980s, the evolution of human rights and cultural preservation erupted into a full-blown organized protest across the country, and such as the American Indian movement, among many others. Newspapers and television stories began to frequently include indigenous perspectives. Laws were enacted and acknowledgement and protection of sacred sites began. Such laws have helped to safeguard sites on public lands, but despite the environmental laws, development is rapidly changing Orange County and still is a constant threat to the Acjachemen and Tongva ancestral homelands. The formation of a cultural resource monitoring firm was necessary to educate and promote the importance of sustainable and respectful stewardship. In 1979, our tribe, under the leadership of Raymond and David Belardes, began to insist that the archaeologists and landowners consult with us. One of our first successes was working with the environmental groups to save Laguna Canyon and also to set aside some land near Camp Pendleton. In approximately 2000, my own experience in the field began. I became the cultural resource director for our tribe and founded Payomkawichum Kaamalam, or PKK, which serves our tribe's cultural resource management program. Next slide, please. My participation as a consultant on the Bolsa Chica spans nearly 30 years, and it continues today. My experiences challenged my belief systems in ways I could have never imagined. My views about life and death, private land ownership, and politics in Orange County, and my connection to the land all deepened. Next, please. During my time in the field as cultural resource director, I witnessed the major portion of this ancient village being unearthed to build the homes. While the archaeological excavations prior to construction were occurring, Acjachemen and Tongva monitors would observe on a daily basis discoveries that would excite archaeologists. But for us, these discoveries of our ancestors and their belongings was very disturbing. Our teachings could not prepare us for this. Our belief is that once we lie our ancestors to rest, they should not be disturbed. They should stay in the ground so that they can continue their journey and return to earth. When the Acjachemen refer to our ancestors, we have been taught that relationships with them don't end at death, that their physical being and their spiritual beings are always connected to our homeland. Principal Western knowledge is based on deductive reasoning with a need to categorize and define. Next, please. Indigenous worldview systems incorporate these elements, but are embedded in a larger social and human context. Native peoples' knowledge prototypes include such ideas as constant motion and flux, existence of waves of energy, interrelationships with all things, and all things are imbued with spirit. Next, please. At times, these differences in worldviews would cause friction or misunderstandings on the site between Indigenous monitors and archaeologists. I'd like to share a few excerpts from my journals that I kept during that time that reflect these differences. Excuse me, need to get some water. February 13th, 2002, the big discovery, a day to remember. The scrapers arrive, the big claw. The second tear into Earth Mother, I discover the largest, most intricate stone, a large cogstone cache, an adrenaline rush, someone's sacred bundle. I am sad that our ancestors' belongings are unearthed. Their powers are diverted to this time and place. In this case, perhaps my connection with these Kaamalam, the first people, is something that I will get strength from a later date. July 3rd, 2002, arrived on the site at 6:50 a.m. Burned saged, I needed to cleanse myself. I cannot watch another person be dug from the earth. Watching the scientists calculate, theorize, create, and conclude has been an experience. While observing them, my thoughts could not help to evaluate their processes. In American culture, the need to define is prevalent. History is an interesting evaluation. Who writes history are typically the dominant ones. Layers and layers of history, all with different perspectives. Soils seem to take on a new meaning. The depth, the color, the texture, objects in it, all are evaluated. The wind passes through and keeps moving. Sometimes the movement is rapid, sometimes subtle, but keeps moving. That is what I must do, keep moving. Among my values are the interconnectedness with nature and not disturbing our ancestors. But when our ancestors are buried on private land, how do you protect them? How do you compromise without compromising your values? Next. Spending years in the field with archaeologists leads to some interesting conversations, mostly about belief systems. For the most part, the archaeologists were sensitive and cooperative. We would sing and dance in hopes to bring some balance to the place that was under so much scrutiny. After years of being together in the field, it's only natural that some of us would become friends. Some of us would become lifelong friends. For the archaeologists that were in the field with me, it wouldn't be proper if we didn't talk about the cucaracha. You see that red truck right there in the bottom right? That was a famous truck. There were days when we would all pile into the cucaracha and travel across the site after checking to make sure that there were no rattlesnakes under the tires. However, it would also be remiss of me to not also mention some of the challenges, such as my sacred offerings being destroyed by an archaeologist. I'd like to share that story with you. Next. Throughout my time at Bolsa Chica, I offered my ceremonial prayers and gifts. I frequently visit the areas where I prayed when I needed strength. One day in late fall, I noticed that my gifts had been scattered. I asked one of the archaeologists if he knew what had happened. He informed me that another archaeologist, whose name I will keep private, had stomped on them and scattered them. When he was asked to stop and informed that these offerings were medicine, the offending archaeologist continued to kick at the religious symbols of mine and said, "F this medicine." I contacted the principal investigator. She removed him from the site. I left messages with the California Indian Legal Services. They did not return my call. At this point, I was angry and frustrated, and it was really unbearable. I had to find a way to make this archaeologist accountable. I had read an article about a sacred site, and it struck home. The author said, whether or not you're a religious person, when you walk into the Sistine Chapel, there is a feeling that comes over you that is hard to explain. Visiting this historic and religious site certainly invokes reverence and respect. This centuries-old, detailed artwork by Michelangelo, the knowledge that the next pope would be selected here, the history of the entire religion enveloped in one space. Now imagine the Sistine Chapel with an oil rig plopped right underneath the famous creation of Adam. Inconceivable, ridiculous, sacrilegious. I had those same feelings knowing my religious symbols had been desecrated. I contacted the Native American Heritage Commission, who offered great support. They recommended that I contact the Attorney General's office. After explaining to the Attorney General's office representative, she advised me that I could press charges under the Ralphs Act as a hate crime at the most, harassment charges at the least. I chose to not proceed with pressing charges. I knew most archaeologists did not act this way and hope that through this incident, future acts of hate could be avoided and a greater respect for indigenous beliefs could be reached. Next, please. I worked with Dr. Lynn H. Gamble, who was at the time the chair of the Professional Standards and Guideline Committee of the Society of California Archaeology, to propose changes in the SCA's Code of Ethic Guidelines. Ultimately, the Society's ethic guidelines were updated to include the responsibilities of archaeologists to support the right of Native Americans or other ethnic peoples to practice their ceremonial traditions on or near sites, in labs, around artifacts or other locations, as well as prohibiting archaeologists from knowingly desecration, defacing, or destroying a Native American or other ethnic people's sacred items or site. So I've just shared with you how difficult this was to witness the unearthing of our ancestors and some of the conflict, as well as some of the conflict resolution that occurred on the site. Now I want to talk about some of the interesting and unusual experiences I had at Bolsa Chica. Next. The day I found the pigments. The archaeologist's mitigation plan was to discover and document every possible cultural life source before construction began. This meant digging quite deep into the earth until the soil that archaeologists consider sterile. It was through this process that we came upon a lens of organic materials. At first, it was only acknowledged as a geological phenomenon, but it was clear to me that this lens contained ceremonial paints. I was very excited to share my knowledge with the principal investigator, Dr. Nancy DeSatels-Wiley. I had never encountered the red ochre, the white caliche, or the carbon black pigments that were so important to us when it came to ceremonial times. The pigments were documented, and then that area was reburied and they were not destroyed. And I was really grateful for that. I spent the rest of the afternoon in awe of how the earth can provide such amazing life sources for us. I felt proud at that moment that I was able to find them and to share my knowledge with the archaeologists. Another story that comes to mind is when the Crow lived with Frank. Frank McDowell, who is no longer with us, was a senior archaeologist for scientific resource surveys. He lived in the trailer on site for security purposes. Since Crow also lived on site, Crow decided to make friends with Frank. It started with just the simple gestures of Frank leaving some, food out on a banister for them. When Frank would eat, he would leave food for them, and eventually all the crows became Frank's friend. However, there was one crow that decided to live with Frank. And as time went on, the crow moved in the trailer. And when it was time to leave the trailer, we had to say goodbye to the crow. And the crow had become everybody's friend on site. It was an emotional day for Frank and for all of us because Crow reminded us about our interconnectedness and our relationship with other beings. It was also a reminder of how Crow plays a role in our ancestral stories. And it was just confirmation to me that if you look hard enough, you can still see these connections and that they're everywhere. Next, please. So another story that I'd like to share is when the ancestors locked us out. This occurred during the time when the archaeologists were preparing the ancestors for reburial. This was a tedious and daunting process. Many times I would go into that spaces where they were held and I would talk with them or sing to them and try to assure them that it wouldn't be long before we'd have them back on their journey. This one particular day, Dr. Lisa Woodward and I decided to write down some of these supernatural occurrences on site. We had created an outline of topics. And then in an instant, her computer went blank and everything was lost. We looked at each other and thought, maybe we're not supposed to be writing down these stories. I decided that maybe I needed to go back into the trailer where they were held and offer some offerings or maybe sing some songs. It just so happened that the osteologist had arrived to evaluate the ancestors. His key spun in the door. I took my key to unlock the door and I was unsuccessful. We called a locksmith and he tried to remove the doorknob and the lock, and he was unsuccessful. He went back to his truck to gather some tools, and then he realized that he had locked his keys in his car. Ultimately, he had to take the door off the hinges, and as he departed, he says, "Darn, I guess I wasn't supposed to get into that trailer." It became clear to Dr. Woodward and myself that maybe it wasn't time to talk about these phenomena that we witnessed at Bolsa. This is just one of a very brief description of one peculiar event that happens, perhaps maybe by coincidence or maybe not. There are other stories like this, such as when the ancestors called 911 or the day the charm stones moved. But I would like to wait and share those stories with my community first. I'm choosing to share these stories with you because they highlight the connection that myself and others felt to the energies of our ancestors throughout our experience on site. And these crosses that you see here, that there was security on site, and the person that lived there made those crosses because they too had many stories to share. Next slide, please. The reburial journal. So as I neared the time to leave the mesa, I write, "It's quiet. The wind blows slightly and the movement of the tags makes sounds. I visit the areas that I traveled and prayed and cried and said goodbye. I say goodbye to the eucalyptus trees, the weather patterns. I say goodbye, the sounds of the gravel beneath my feet, the smells, the cucaracha. And most of all, I say goodbye to the experience. I imagine the time when the ancestors will be reburied. I imagine the relief and the peace that will bring me. It is important to bring a good heart and a loving attitude during the reburial. I wish them all a very safe journey." Next, please. Through the years that I was on Bolsa Chica, many plans were put into place and many reburials occurred along with the ancestors and their belongings. There were numerous reburials that occurred with the Acjachemen Tongva community members present. The last and the largest reburial took the most preparation, having to decide the logistics, equipment, invitations to the community members took about 1.5 years to prepare. There were no teachings for reburial ceremony, so we did the best we could in securing our ancestors and their belongings in a place that would never be unearthed again. It was a glorious day, a huge weight off my heart and shoulders. We had completed our responsibility in making sure the ancestors were back in the earth and at rest again. Next, please. Ano, coyote in our language, visited us weekly. We came to expect that he would greet each other. We would see each other and we'd greet each other occasionally. Ano watched a lot on what we did from afar, and we were respectful of Ano's presence. And every reburial, Ano was present. At the last reburial, the largest one, Ano was not present. Ano had lied down with the ancestors in the pit and died. In one of our creation stories, Ano steals the heart of Wiot when Wiot was dying. It is said that Ano carries the spirit of our ancestors. To me, that was such a telling moment as he lied down with our ancestors to rest. And I was grateful that Ano was present. Next, please. Today, when we visit the Mesa, I can't help to notice how privileged people are to live in such a beautiful part of our homeland. I look out towards the ocean and down towards the lowlands, and I'm grateful that our ancestors were laid to rest and that the birds and the fish and the coyotes and all the other living beings still have a place to live. I've come to learn that there is no way to protect our ancestors on private land. This wasn't about compromising. I didn't authorize or condone these actions. I just witnessed them and did what I could to ensure that our ancestors were handled with dignity and respect. And it is through this experience that I found ways to draw strength to continue and to fight for our sacred spaces. And I have learned that it is necessary for us to hold title in our homeland and in order to be good stewards to the land. Next, please. Everybody wanted to save the site, Chief Belardes said. The state and the trust bought all the lowlands with minimal sites on it. Instead of saving the mesa, they built the houses. We should have done minimal archaeology up here. Now we know more than we probably should have known. He was referring to the hundreds of burials that were unearthed on the mesa. How can we choose between protecting these sites, the lowland habitat with its fragile wetland ecosystem? That, of course, is more ecologically sensitive, but the upper mesa, more culturally sensitive. The trade-off for preservation on the lowlands was the destruction of the culturally sensitive sites on the upper mesa and the construction of homes. There shouldn't have been, or we shouldn't have had to make a choice between environmental protection and cultural preservation. This example illustrates how environmental and cultural concerns do not always align. While indigenous worldviews, these concepts are two sides of the same coin.
In progress.
David always said that real relationships don't exist unless you have trials, triumphs, and tribulations. You can stand outside and shout all you want about the injustice that's happened towards the indigenous people. But if you don't have a seat at the table, you won't be able to make real change. It is because of this thought process that I have built relationships with landowners and members of the archaeological community. There has been shouting matches, discontent, but ultimately all entities understood the importance of finding a way to come to some resolution. I have found in my experiences that the only way to achieve our objectives has been to have a seat at the table. Next, please. Today, the fate of the remaining undeveloped portion of the upper mesa of Bolsa Chica is still in question. Currently, there's approximately 11 undeveloped acres of private-owned land remaining at Bolsa Chica. There has been a tremendous amount of controversy surrounding the last remnants of this sacred place that we call home. Next. In 2020, members of the Acjachemen and Tongva communities came together to form the Acjachemen Tongva Land Conservancy with the shared commitment to returning ancestral land to Native peoples. Our first order of business is bringing the remaining portions of our sacred site of Bolsa Chica under our stewardship. Next, please. We believe that this land returning to the care of the Native people is the best possible outcome. Through caring for our land, we will continue to heal, educate, and preserve our traditions and culture for the next 7 generations to come. We're still here and always will be. As our ancestors held the land sacred, so will our descendants. Next, please. The Acjachemen Tongva Land Conservancy has partnered with the Native American Land Conservancy. NALC is an organization which has worked since 1998 to protect and restore sacred sites, focusing on Aboriginal territory of tribes in present-day Southern California. During ATL's first 3 years,
Seem to have lost the audio.
There, we're getting there. There we go. So as I said before, desecration and the fight for preservation are the realities that the Acjachemen and Tongva people face. In Orange County alone, there are over 2,000 recorded ancestral sites. Prior to the 1970s, there were no environmental laws established to protect our sacred sites. Laws established since the 70s have helped to safeguard sacred sites, but despite these laws, development continues to be a constant threat to our homelands. The Acjachemen and Tongva communities currently hold no title in any of our ancestral land. If you look at the history of California, many California Native nations were never given a reservation or land when their traditional lands were stolen by colonization. This was especially true along the coast, when colonists encroached on native land began at a very early date. Next, please. Land Back is a movement that seeks to reestablish political and economic control to indigenous people over land that had belonged to them prior to colonization. In California alone, victories of land back movements include the return of 1,200 acres in Big Sur, California to the Esalen tribe, and Northern California city of Eureka has returned 200 acres of land to the Wiyot tribe. Bolsa Chica's return to the Acjachemen Tongva would be another such example of social and justice for Native people. It is imperative that we acquire, preserve, and protect our sacred lands in order to educate and promote the importance of sustainable and respectful stewardship. Our philosophy on land management is that we use traditional knowledge and balance of ecosystems. We know that nature has the capacity for renewal, and we seek ways to use and live in the natural world without destroying it. Through land stewardship, we will foster opportunities for education and connection to our culture. Our sacred spaces enable reflection, remembrance, and honoring of our ancestors. We cannot be whole without our places of worship. Next, please. So in conclusion, I hope that this presentation has provoked some insight on our worldviews through some of my experiences. These are my ancestors. These are the people whose energies I carry. We ask for your support in our efforts towards land back. And I leave you honoring my family and teachers and hope that when you visit our territory and travel through our canyons, our valleys, our bays, estuaries, and visit the ocean, you will continue to hear and feel our ancestors' presence. I want to thank you for your attention. Poek up. I am finished. So now, questions?
Yeah, Joyce, I have a question.
Okay.
When on the Mesa, when people bought and moved into their homes, were they made aware of the controversy that they'd be living on top of?
Well, there were no other ancestors were not left where the houses were buried. The ancestors were reburied in another location. But yes, there was a clause that indicated that it was a burial ground, and many Asian ethnicities chose to not live there because they understood what that meant. But many people chose to.
Yeah, but they probably could not have gotten everybody out of there.
Well, if you were on the Mesa, we monitored the archaeologists going really into the paleo part of the Mesa and then some. So it's very unlikely that any ancestors are buried in the paleo portion of Mother Earth, but there are a lot of rodents, and they make a lot of highways in the soil. So, perhaps, but if there is ever anything found, hopefully we'll be notified.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Any questions? Yes.
I would like to make a short comment. First, thank you for your heart and your soul and the statements tonight. I was involved with Bolsa Chica Mesa
Yes, you were.
for a quarter of a century. When they found the white clay over in the bluff 9,000 years ago, it's been a sacred site ever since then. The archaeology was unusual. And we all know a lot more because there's 9 technical reports. It's a
Yes.
big shelf. That is a tremendous accomplishment for all of us. Then at the end of that, there was a grand reburial ceremony. And most all of the sacred things that could be recognized were placed back in Mother Earth.
You were there.
Yes,
Mhm.
many of us were there.
Yes.
Some of us were up on the top and some of us were on the bottom with the rattles.
Yes.
But
Mhm.
the answer was our hearts all recognized what was happening. Last comment, when you spoke around this, the site has gone through a series of sovereignties, from Native American to Spanish, Mexican, American, and now we live with law. And so it is that those properties have value and development rights.
Right.
We must work on that. That's the way it is. We need a seat at the table as we change that.
Joyce, I'm sorry to interrupt, but any questions from the audience? Might they be able to come closer to the microphone so the rest of us can absorb the question?
Do you want to come back and talk, say that over? Are you good? Yeah. Or can we take the mic to him? Yes. Okay.
I wanted to make 4 comments. One, to thank Joyce tonight for her heart and soul on this sacred project. 2, it's been sacred for 9,000 years because the radiocarbon dates on the white clay deposit out at the edge of the cliff must have been very special. And ever since then, there's been people living on the mesa top, special, sacred. So the archaeology was unusual in that 19 big reports got filed in the end. We are all the wiser because of all of this. It's in those reports. Lastly, this site has gone through several sovereigns. It was Native American, Spanish, Mexican, and then US. The properties, there are property rights, and the development rights are part of that. Yes, indeed. This has seen itself developed into housing. if we're going to change that on such sacred sites, we need a seat at the table, as you said. Thank you for sharing your heart. Tonight was special.
Anybody else have any other comments, questions?
Hey, Joyce, can you hear me?
Yes.
I have my accent.
Hey, hi, Pat.
Hey, great talk. I really learned a lot, took a lot of notes, and I'd like to give you some of my thoughts later by email or when we work together again. I just wanted to say it's been great working with you the last 20 years, and you really did bring a loving attitude to everything you did, at least with me on projects, and I look forward to more. And by the way, you're a pretty badass too. Thanks, Joyce, for your time.
Thank you, Pat. David would like that.
Yeah,
Yes.
we'll see you soon.
Okay, does anybody else have any question for Joyce? If not, I want to say thank you so much, Joyce. I'm going to be sending you an appreciation certificate for tonight's talk from the Society. And this is a very memorable presentation. The most emotional one I can ever remember given to the PCAS. And the best person to give it, except David, if he could have given it. But I appreciate it. We all appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. It was a pleasure.
Welcome. Let me announce next month's speaker. It's going to be Dr. Vance Holliday, the University of Arizona School of Anthropology and Department of Geosciences. He spoke to us last spring about his white sands footprints. And he's coming back. He's going to give an in-depth, the Southwest U.S. in-depth presentation on all the Clovis sites. And there's one Clovis site that he's keeping very special a presentation to include. It's pretty different and unique. So anyway, that's going to be next month on February 9th. And I hope more people can come and join in the in-person part of the PCAS program. So if that's nobody has any other questions, I'm going to say goodnight to everybody. Drive safe, stay dry, and enjoy. Thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you. Good night, and thank you, Joyce.
Thank you, Joyce.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Good night, all.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce.